There are a lot of shortcomings that he has as a director on why he couldn't make this movie stand out any more than it could.
It's like poverty. Yeah, there was some poverty.
Really, coming from them, it's like, what's the point?
Did George Clooney just make Top Gun, but in a boat?
Hi, this is The Real Generation Gap. I'm BJ Kang.
And I'm Fred Satilli.
And this is Boys in the Boat we're reviewing.
Okay, BJ Kang, welcome to the show here. And it's my assertion. I want to know what you think. Did George Clooney just make Top Gun, but in a boat?
Like, what do you mean by that exactly?
Well, first of all, Top Gun was a smash hit. And when I went to the theater, the people just applauded and cried. I mean, Top Gun was such a smash hit for about a week or two, right? And this audience had the same reaction to this movie. Now, in Top Gun never lost, you know? And in this movie, the guys never lost. Mm-hmm. To me, it was just Top Gun, but instead of a modern fighter plane in a 1936 shell, rowing boat, mm-hmm. and go into the Olympics instead of actually into combat. So I looked at it and I smiled to myself and said, okay, hyper-patriotic movie. I love that. We need that. I'm really happy that happened. Almost surprised that George Clooney did something like that, considering. But to me, it was Top Gun in a boat. What do you think?
For a movie set in 1936, at the height of the Great Depression, at the height of Nazi Germany rule, and in the middle of the Olympics, a story about 9 impoverished boys in a rowing boat trying to make their way to glory, it didn't feel very glorious. I definitely get that sense that there was something missing from the film to really top it off, to bring it to the next level, to sort of make it stand out from other sports movies, because that is what this is. It's a sports movie.
Yeah, that's true.
Mm-hmm.
That's true. One of the things that I struggled with was because I didn't have the kind of hardship that these athletes had. I never missed a meal in my life. It was hard for me to appreciate their angst. The star of the show was abandoned at the age of 14. He lived in the junkyard. He was dealing with starvation. He just lived in an absolutely horrific environment. It was a very hopeless environment. And I couldn't identify with that because I don't have an experience like that. His angst in the movie was very within him. It wasn't really from outside influences. It wasn't like somebody was really beating him down. He made the team right away. He didn't really struggle that way. When I evaluated the way he acted the part and the way the part was written, I chastised myself because there's no possible way I could identify with the character. I just don't have, a depression. Frankly, I thought of my father because he was brought up during that time, right?
Yeah.
So it was his angst. It wasn't well described in the movie.
Yeah.
But for me, I needed more. I needed, because he really had a problem. He was a very unhappy guy. And I could see how you would be. Since I don't have that experience, I felt like the movie was lacking in explaining that, mm-hmm. or somehow bringing that out. And maybe it's impossible to bring that out. So I'm not really qualified to judge that quite as well as I'd like to be.
I definitely know exactly how that feels. I came from a similar background as well. I never really had to go through such a horrific struggle like that, growing up during the Great Depression. In the movie, he's living in a broken down car in a shanty town. A shanty town was basically like houses that they would make out of just spare boards, just random pieces of trash, because they were just that poor. They couldn't even afford to live in like a really bad house. They had to make up scrap houses. But scenes like those, there was only like 4, maybe 3 scenes where it shows that. And then for the rest of the movie, he spends his time in a university. And I'm like, okay, well, let's see more about what his university life is like. And you don't really get to see that. There's 2 scenes where he's in the lecture hall. I don't even think you really know what his major is. And
well, I'm sorry for interrupting, but you're really right about that. His whole goal in going to school and getting on the rowing team was so he could afford to be in the school to study engineering. But they never showed any inclination for engineering. He wasn't, off to the side. He wasn't really doing his homework and figuring things out.
Exactly.
And it was kind of like a fake reason.
Exactly. It just feels like they sort of glazed or brushed over the fact that he grew up in the Great Depression, that he was impoverished, that he was going on this rowing team just to survive, to make money. It's like it's in the middle of an extremely historical event, the Great Depression, and yet the story, which relies on that historical period, doesn't really play with it at all. There's a sort of hesitance to explore that, really.
That's why I think it was nothing but Top Gun and a boat. There was so much that could have been done here. And, I mean, I didn't want to see a 5-hour movie, but it was pretty flat. The movie was, there was no real highs and lows. It just was a pretty even-keeled, historic, now we know that there was such a thing and it did happen. I like the fact that they mentioned Jesse Owens a couple times.
Yeah.
Because he was the real hero of that Olympics.
Yeah.
So that without mentioning him, it would have been a real travesty. But I didn't think much of the movie. I have to admit, I was emotional. Whenever I see anybody overcoming hardship, it really affects me. And I'm patriotic, so the fact that we won was wonderful. I think they had to be historically accurate. They obviously couldn't have them lose a couple and then win a couple and, right down to the wire. I think that, for one thing, rowing, it's not a real high drama thing. It's a drag race.
Yeah.
And they don't turn the boat. In other words, it's just start to finish. I don't know how many minutes it actually is. The idea that they were able to overcome a full boat length false start and come back, because everybody in the Olympics, they're all Olympic champions. They're all legacy champions. Yeah. So it wasn't like this happened at the college level and they really did it and they came back. That would have been believable in the beginning. But at the Olympic level, the story's kind of unbelievable. It may or may not be exactly true. It may be exactly true, but it's still kind of unbelievable. I don't know. I thought the Americans beating the Russian in ice hockey was much more exciting than this.
Yeah, exactly. In that story, there feels like there's a real conflict going on. I believe it's called Miracle on Ice. I believe that's that one.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Had these guys hung out with the German rowers a day or two beforehand and maybe had a couple fist fights or something, it would have been. And once again, this is a historically accurate thing, I'm assuming. Much as I want to add drama, I'm wrong to do that. Yeah. But at the same time, as a movie, pretty flat.
Yeah. I know that you said that you like when there's not big stars in the cast because it helps you to focus on the story more. I definitely think that was a good decision by George Clooney. I was not very familiar at all with any of the actors in this cast, and I thought this is a perfect opportunity for George Clooney to just focus on the story, focus on who the characters are, focus on their real lives, and yet he didn't do much with them to bring anything out of these actors. It's like, yes, I want to see what an actor I'm not familiar with, see what they can do when they're given a character, but when the character they're given is not really a character at all, there's nothing really coming from them, it's like, what's the point?
Yeah, there was no, and it was a shame to me that the rest of the rowers were really not very much mentioned.
Yeah.
There could have been a lot more depth to the story if all 8 of those guys had some backstory. And when they were actually doing the rowing, I like artistic editing.
Yeah.
And if they would have done a thing like, some of these Western shootouts have it, right? Like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, where the 3 of them are just, it's his face, his face, his face. So if you would have seen this guy rowing and that guy rowing and this guy rowing and that guy, and the faces and the intensity of all those guys, and then the guy who was the caller, and his story, he had a little baby backstory, but they never really elaborated on that either. So I didn't have much of a personal investment in this movie.
It definitely was weird that they were spinning it as like these were all individual men who came from impoverished backgrounds looking to just survive, but then they find a thirst for glory by working together as a team, and yet only 3 of them are really important and only one of them gets any sort of meaningful character development, and it doesn't go very far at all. I think one of the only characters that really stood out to me in that movie was the coach. The coach really stood out to me because he's the one who really kind of goes through a change or a shift in perspective. One of my favorite scenes is when he's going through all of their lockers and he finds all of their boots and each one of them has a hole in them, and he begins to think that this is, like, to him it's just a sport, to him it's just about winning, but for them he realizes it's something more than that. They came into this to survive, and now he understands that he has to sell them what it means to win, what it means to be a champion instead of someone just trying to survive.
Right, because they're 8 losers.
Yeah.
You know, they're not like the Princeton boys or the Yale boys or
Yeah.
anything. These are guys. And his catharsis is wonderful. He finally smiles.
Yeah.
He has it, his whole career's on the line, his whole reputation and everything. He's actually overcomes the most,
Yeah.
you know. And his wife was a wonderful character. She's the quintessential good woman who believes in you to the very end.
Yeah.
I found that touching. I found that very touching. The other guy who was a sensational minor player in the story, but minor but not minor, was the boat builder.
I believe his name was George Pocock. That's his
Yeah.
name. His scenes were one of my favorites. Out of all the parts in the movie, I think those are some of the best parts that were done the best, because they were the most character developing, I think, for the main character, Joe. Because when Joe's in the boat, he's just rowing. And it's really easy when you're just rowing to sort of just think, I'm just rowing and this is just a sport I do. But when he's talking with George as he's in charge of maintaining the boats, like after the events, and he oils them and he, I don't know, like smooths out any sort of nicks or bumps that they get, he begins to understand that there's a lot of art, or like craftsmanship, that there's a lot of care, there's a science that goes behind what makes these boats move in the water. And that's when Joe finally begins to really appreciate the sport.
Well, also, he makes a physical connection with this thing. He begins to have a love affair with the shell. It's his shell.
Yeah.
It's not just the shell. He's got many, many hours of work on this thing, and nobody belongs in it more than him. And when he has so much angst that he says, I don't give a damn about this. I'm out.
Yeah.
I think the fact that he can't be in his boat is a major aspect in him returning to it.
Yeah.
Like, this is like only I belong in this seat. And a lot of people have a physical connection, a racing car or a very special musical instrument.
Yeah.
Where nobody can play this but me, or nobody can drive this but me, and nobody can understand the love affair I'm having with this thing. I like that aspect a lot, but that wasn't shown really. You know what I mean? Like, he could have had one line in there where he said, I can't let the boat down.
Yeah.
I have to defend the boat. You know, it's like a knight defending a castle.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, I can't let the boat down. I can't let my guys down. I can't let the boat down. You know, when I was a little boy, I was on a baseball team.
Yeah.
And visiting my grandmother was a real special event for all the kids in my family. And they were going to go away for the weekend and do that. And I said, oh, we're going to go to grandmom's. My dad said, you can't. I said, why? He goes, you made a commitment to a team. You're the catcher on this ball team. You're going to be in that game. You can't let those guys down. They need you back there. They depend on. How would you like if Westy, the shortstop, wasn't there? Or Peter Egan, you know, you're going to be there, kid. And I was like, oh, I want to go see grandmom. I was like, yeah, well, you're a young man now. You know, you made a commitment to a team. So those aspects are interesting to me. And those are philosophical things that could have been expressed a little more. The movie was just too flat for me.
You see, and like that story you just gave about your grandma, it's like that's a good movie scene right there in and of itself. But it's like, where's that in this movie? It's like, if it's what makes a great sports movie, I think, is that you have to remember that sports are played by humans. It's a game. Humans love to play games, and humans love to win. But you have to focus on the aspect that these are humans playing, and that there's a lot more going on for them than just what happens on the court, or for, in this movie, what goes on in the boat. And that's not really explored. What for you makes like a great sports movie?
Oh my God, there were so many. But you're right. I'll tell you what really does, and it was great in the second Rocky movie, overcoming your own fear. Overcoming your own, because ultimately it's you against you when you're out there, right?
Yeah.
Nothing more than boxing exemplifies that more than anything else. But it's really you putting yourself to the limit, to the absolute test. We just reviewed the movie Ferrari, and those guys getting into that car, they were ready to die there. You know, they wanted to really go all the way. So when a guy has to go absolutely all the way, and that's what the Olympics is about. You know, you come out there, and for that 3 minutes on the balance beam or the rings or throwing that javelin or whatever you're doing, it's 10 years of training has to come all together for that one quintessential moment where you overcome injuries that you may have, psychological damage that you may have, doubts you may have about yourself. You overcome it all, you perform, and you do it.
Yeah.
And that's what makes a great sports movie.
I believe the exact same thing. And what I really love about Rocky 1, for example, it was really hard for me to not compare this to Rocky, because what it is at its core is it's an underdog sports movie. I thought, to me, what's the greatest underdog sports movie, in my opinion? I thought Rocky. I was like, well, what is it that makes Rocky so inspirational, so moving, and so authentic feeling, even though it's not based on a true story like this one is closely as adapted is.
Yeah, well, tell that to Chuck Wepner.
and it's that, like, to me, what sort of stands out is that the fighting in Rocky, the big boxing match, is only 20 minutes of, I think, an hour and a half movie. The other whole, like, 70% of the movie is he's going through the motions of his life, and the motions of his life is he's poor. There's so many shots of him where he's walking up these dingy stairs to his apartment, where he's just sort of hanging out in his dingy apartment, or he's walking down these streets that are sort of don't look very safe. There's hobos outside his apartment huddling around a fire in a garbage can.
He has a pretty hopeless life.
He has a pretty hopeless life. But you really walk a mile in Rocky's shoes. And so
especially when he's training.
Yeah, exactly.
And they had the exciting music when he was training that became an iconoclastic piece of music. You know, this movie had no music.
It did feel very generic. It was very, there was...
It was almost a documentary.
It did.
Almost, without the classic pitfalls of documentaries.
One more thing I wanted to highlight another thing I want to highlight between like Rocky and this movie is this is George Clooney's movie. He's the director of this movie. He's adapting this from a book, but I feel that there are a lot of shortcomings that he has as a director on why he couldn't make this movie stand out any more than it could. He sort of just touches points. It's like he's sort of just slapping on certain labels to the characters and thinking that will go the mile to touch the audience. It's like, okay, let's have some scenes of him being poor and people will get that he's poor. Let's have some scenes of him trying to let's have some scenes of him going to school for people to know that he's going to school to get a better job, without really going into any of that. And I feel like this is at the end. This is towards George, after George Clooney's done a lot of movies, and I feel like it's hard for him to really draw out that struggle to show to the audience when he's been successful for so long. When Sylvester Stallone wrote the script for Rocky and then pitched it, he was living like Rocky. He was dirt poor.
Right. So you think that Clooney trivialized these foundational aspects? It's like poverty. Yeah, there was some poverty. Mm-hmm. Like a menu item, right?
Yeah.
Had some poverty.
Yeah.
Had angst with his dad. He was abandoned as a kid. Check 1, check 2, check 3. Now let's get him in the boat. You're really right about that, and that's good insight. Mm-hmm. If you want to make a movie, you gotta draw from something within yourself.
Yeah.
And to make a depression movie, if you were he had a golden life. I mean, sexiest man alive, hit TV show, right into the movies, can do no wrong. They box him up with other big movie stars right away.
Yeah.
So there was all that kind of support. So that's a really good insight. Mm-hmm. Cool.
Yeah. I think I am ready to give a rating if you are.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Personally, for me, it was very cookie cutter. It's hard for it not to be an inspirational story when it's based off of a true story that is inspiring.
Right.
However, it's not distinctive as an inspirational movie. There's nothing really drawn out from it that's really remarkable at all. And so I kind of just have to give it like a 5 out of 10. Personally.
Yeah, I was thinking 6.
Yeah.
I was thinking 6 because I have more years of patriotism in me than you. So I was happy to see the audience, how they responded. I was happy to see that, a heroic, feel-good, winning movie.
Yeah.
As opposed to one that has like a weird ending that you're not sure what happened. Here you're exactly sure everything that happened and everybody lived happily ever after. So, yeah, 5 for you, 6 for me.
Yeah.
Go ahead and give us the outro.
Thanks for watching. Make sure to hit that subscribe button. Make sure to like and leave a comment. Did George Clooney basically just make Top Gun in a boat? Is he the sexiest man alive? And make sure to hit that notification bell to get notified whenever we release a new video. Thanks for watching.